The leopard skin hat was Mobutu's power trademark. The hat was more than just a fashion statement, for with it lied a hidden meaning, perhaps a raw message that just like a leopard, Mobutu was very territorial, who did not flinch when making a kill, because he was a non-predator, without emotions or a care for morality. For Mobutu, his motivation was power. It was all or nothing, and when he sought for this power, he wanted it all for himself. Mobutu would transform into a fox when he needed to manipulate his target victims, beguiling them with his charm and charisma. But when he desired a takedown, Mobutu morphed into a lion, terrifying all his opponents into surrender or submission. He never cared much for loyalty or integrity, unless it was of benefit to him. Mobutu was in every which way a sociopath, charming and heartless at the same time, with a need for total control and a thirst for the ultimate power. And it is this pursuit of power that destroyed his legacy in the end. History has eternally casted Joseph Mobutu in the role of a villainous monster and a crime boss, one who looted the government coffers, assassinated his enemies, and ruled over Congo with an iron fist. However, history has yet to provide us with the reasons as to why Mobutu became Congo's boogeyman. Perhaps then we can endeavor to get to know the man behind the man. Who raised this man? Who mentored this man? Who did this man look up to? Who influenced this man? Who groomed this man? Who supported this man? Because a man is a product of his own environment. And no matter how you choose to look at Mobutu, the reality remains that he grew to become the puppet master, just like his predecessors, the Belgian colonialists, the ones who groomed him to become the dictator that he was. Joseph Désiré Mobutu, popularly known as Mobutu Sese Seko, was the infamous Congolese dictator who served as the second president of the Democratic Republic of Congo for 32 years. Joseph Désiré Mobutu was born on the 14th of October in 1930 in Lisala, Equator, Belgian Congo. Joseph Mobutu was born to Marie-Madeleine Yemo, his mother, who was a hotel maid, and Alberic Bemani, his father, who was a cook for a Belgian judge. When Mobutu was 8 years old, his father passed on. Thereafter, he was raised by an uncle and a grandfather, together with his 3 siblings. Now, the wife of the Belgian judge, who Mobutu's father used to work for as a cook, took a liking to this young Mobutu and taught him how to read, write, and speak fluent French. And as you all know, French is the official language of the Democratic Republic of Congo. His mother, Yemo, relied on relatives to educate Joseph Mobutu, for which they obliged. Therefore, his mother sent him to his uncle in a town called Mbandaka, where he attended the Christian Brothers School, a Catholic boarding school, and he excelled in the academic subjects. He also ran a class newspaper. At this point, we can conclude that despite his father's passing, Mobutu's extended family and well-wishers made sure that he was well taken care of. Let's examine the facts. His grandfather raised him after the death of his father. His uncle made sure that he was educated. His mother was his emotional support his entire life. And this Belgian judge and the wife made sure to educate him on how to read, write, and speak in French. Therefore, Joseph Mobutu was not lacking in any area of his life. Even the Catholic Church educated him and guided him on the straight and narrow path. For when Mobutu became a rebellious student, the priests in the Catholic Mission boarding school, where he attended school, opted to recruit him in the army instead of sending him to prison. Hence, Mobutu was ordered to serve for 7 years in the Belgian colonial army, the Force Publique, for this was the usual punishment for all rebellious students. So therefore, Mobutu was educated in missionary schools, after which he began his career in 1949 in the Belgian Congolese army known as Force Publique, rising from a clerk to a sergeant major, which was the highest rank that was open to Africans. While still in the army, Joseph Mobutu wrote articles for newspapers in Kinshasa. After his discharge in the army in 1956, Mobutu became a reporter for the Belgian newspaper called L'Avenir. Later on, he became the editor of the weekly newspaper Actualité Africaine. Mobutu's entry into politics was when he met Patrice Lumumba through his press contacts. He even joined Lumumba's Congolese National Movement, the MNC. Mobutu eventually became Lumumba's personal aide, even representing him at the Brussels Roundtable Conference in 1960. Now, Patrice Lumumba was a Congolese independent leader who served as the first Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo. Needless to say, it was Patrice Lumumba that gave Joseph Mobutu a career in politics. When Patrice Lumumba became the Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo, he awarded Joseph Mobutu the office of the Secretary of State to the presidency, where Mobutu held much influence in the final determination of the rest of the government. Moreover, Patrice Lumumba made Joseph Mobutu the Army Chief of Staff and even awarded him with the rank of a colonel. Therefore, Joseph Mobutu was promoted from a sergeant major to a colonel. Now, those who worked with Joseph Mobutu during his tenure in the office of the Secretary of State considered him to be calm, thoughtful, prudent, very pragmatic, and with common sense. They saw him as a very sensible young man who had the best interests of his new independent country at heart. But was Joseph Mobutu the man who people claimed him to be, or was he wearing a performance mask? At this particular time in history, during the Cold War era, there were other foreign players in Congo with vested economic and political interests fighting to occupy the Congo and wanting to dominate the country's resources for their own gain. And as you all know, Congo is one of the richest parts of Africa with minerals such as cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, oil, and gas. Now, these foreign players included the US, the Belgium, Soviet Union, and Israel. These foreign players were determined to work with the government of the day, supporting the interests of the government in exchange for trade deals. At this time, Joseph Kasavubu was then the president of the Republic of Congo. He took action and decided to dissolve Patrice Lumumba's government, which he accused of communist sympathies. And this is because Patrice Lumumba had asked for aid from the Soviet Union in exchange for their occupants in Congo. And as a result, other foreign players felt visibly threatened by the Russian presence in Congo. And if you are confused about the roles of these two, the presidency and the prime minister, let me explain. You see, in 1960, Congo had a coalition government for which Patrice Lumumba became the first prime minister of Congo in 1960. And at the same time, Joseph Kasavubu was the first president of the Republic of Congo, which means that these two offices existed at the same time and ran simultaneously. And that is why there was tension between these two forces, with Patrice Lumumba engaging with the Russians, who were non-communists, while Joseph Kasavubu was in partnership with the Allied powers, who were non-capitalists. Now remember, people, that this was the era of Cold War, where the world was divided between communism and capitalism. And so this imbalance of power between the presidency and the prime minister's office brought about the Congo crisis of 1960, when the president, Joseph Kasavubu, dissolved Lumumba's government, which he accused of being a communist sympathy. However, Patrice Lumumba, the premier, refused to accept his dismissal, and instead he announced Kasavubu's dismissal, creating a stalemate that endured for weeks. At this juncture, perhaps you are asking yourself, where is Mobutu in all this? What has this story got to do with Joseph Mobutu? Well, as you know, Joseph Mobutu was then the Army Chief of Staff. Therefore, it was his sworn duty to ensure the highest attainment of national security. Mobutu was tasked with the duty to curb power struggle that was between Joseph Kasavubu and the Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. And one would be forgiven to believe that Joseph Mobutu would be loyal to the premier, Patrice Lumumba, since it was Patrice Lumumba who gave him a career in politics. But no, as a matter of fact, Colonel Mobutu did the opposite, for he was secretly supporting Joseph Kasavubu, the president. But when Lumumba rallied his forces to oust Kasavubu out of office in September of 1960, Colonel Mobutu seized control of the government, announcing that he was neutralizing all politicians. So from September of 1960 to February of 1961, the president and the premier were neutralized. After which, Colonel Mobutu turned over the government back to the president, Joseph Kasavubu, who then made Joseph Mobutu into commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Can you imagine that? The betrayal. Just the audacity of this man Mobutu to betray Patrice Lumumba, who was his friend and comrade. And for what? I tell you people, trust nobody but your God. But I digress. To play fair, Joseph Mobutu would have gotten rid of both the premier and the president, but not to play favorites, of which he did. He did not play fair. And this is the reason why. Apparently, it's been said that the Belgian intelligence had recruited Mobutu to be an informer to their coalition government. And if this is true, that Mobutu was a spy for the Allied powers, then it does make sense as to why Joseph Mobutu betrayed his own friend. And it also explains why President Kasavubu made him the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces. However, this is what happened to the Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. He was arrested by Mobutu's troops, then flown to a place called Katanga in Congo, where he was assassinated by a firing squad, ending his life in the most violent way. And what of President Joseph Kasavubu? Well, over the course of 5 years after the death of Patrice Lumumba, the president presided over a succession of a weak government up until the 25th of November 1965, when the commander-in-chief of all the armed forces, which is Joseph Mobutu, seized power for the second time, deposing the president and subsequently declaring himself the head of state. Joseph Mobutu placed Kasavubu under house arrest before eventually allowing the deposed president to retire in his farm in Mayombe. Kasavubu ultimately died in hospital in Boma 4 years later, and possibly after a long illness. What a shame. What a shame. And this is a question that I always ask myself. Why are military regimes prone to civil wars? Can military men become politicians? Do military men how to run democratic regimes? I have witnessed many military regimes, and the story is the same in all of them. Coup d'etat, overthrowing of governments. Military officers seizing power and overthrowing the government of the day every time, and the cycle continues on and on. It's like military men do not understand democratic principles because they are used to taking orders from above. To them, one at the top is the most powerful, and sharing of power is foreign to them. To military regimes, power can only be found in vertical spaces, but not horizontal spaces. And this has to do with conditioning. They have been conditioned to climb up the pyramid to achieve power. Anyway, Joseph Kasavubu's exit from the corridors of power made Mobutu glide his way into power in 1965, reorganizing the Congolese army and Africanizing names of places. For example, he changed the country's name from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Zaire, its earlier name. He also changed his own name from Joseph Desire Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko Nkunku-Bendu wa Nzambanga, which means the all-powerful warrior. And this is because his inflexible will to win. He would go from one conquest to the next, leaving fire in his wake. Mobutu led a one-man rule government with only one political party, his own political party, known as the Popular Movement Revolution Party. During his reign, Joseph Mobutu became increasingly unpopular as the people of Congo viciously rejected his regime. Therefore, he desperately recruited musical artists to diffuse the people's criticism of him. And one such artist was the legendary Franco Luambo Luanzo Makiadi. And of those of you who do not know who Franco Luambo Makiadi is, he was a legendary musical artist and guitarist, and arguably one of the biggest artists to have come from Africa. Franco led one of the most influential orchestras in Africa, popularly known as the TPOK Jazz, which translates in English to mean the All-Powerful Orchestra Kinshasa Jazz Band. Now, Franco's career thrived very copiously thanks to his active and public participation and his friendship with Joseph Mobutu. Franco's job was to warm up audiences before Mobutu's speeches, therefore diffusing any tensions that would erupt in those political rallies. Mobutu knew that the Congo people loved and respected Franco Makiadi. Therefore, to Mobutu, Franco became his spokesman. As a matter of fact, Franco is credited to have the longest list of songs, either regarding Mobutu or the political life of Zaire in general. However, it's not really known whether or not Franco endorsed Mobutu willingly or that he was forced to sing Mobutu's praises. Moreover, there were reports of allegations regarding Franco serving as an informant of Mobutu's notorious secret service. Perhaps Franco partnered with Mobutu to further his career, or maybe Franco admired Mobutu and willingly supported him. Either way, they both benefited from this twisted relationship. At the height of Mobutu's regime, he became very much paranoid, believing that the military was out to overthrow his government. And rumor had it that he had mirrors installed all over the presidential residence in an effort to see his enemies who were planning to ambush him with a surprise attack. And paranoia became Mobutu's reality, always on guard and fearful for his life, especially toward the end of his reign, when he became frail with age and was ill, having been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Mobutu knew that he did not stand a chance if there ever was an attempted coup purposed to overthrow his government. And unfortunately, this is what happened to Mobutu. Karma had come knocking at his door after 32 grueling years of being at the helm of power in Congo. Before we conclude with this Mobutu saga, I seek to humanize Joseph Désiré Mobutu by providing logical reasons as to why he became a coal predator. First and foremost, Mobutu was influenced by his colonial masters, the Belgian colonialists, the ones who scrambled and partitioned the Congo for their own selfish economic and political reasons. Needless to say, Joseph Mobutu followed in their footsteps and became a devil's pawn with the agenda to divide, to conquer, and to rule with brutality. After all, did he not betray Patrice Lumumba, his predecessor, by staging a coup d'etat while he was still in office, ousting him out of power and getting rid of him execution style? Secondly, Joseph Mobutu was a trained military man by the Belgian colonial government, and as you know, democracy was an ideology that was not in practice at this particular time in history. Therefore, Mobutu was born, raised, and influenced by an autocratic regime, one that was dictatorial, oppressive, suppressive, and quite frankly, depressive. Joseph Mobutu craved the kind of power that made him sovereign. He desired to be the supreme leader, to sit at the helm of power above all and beyond all, just like his colonial masters. And the third reason why Joseph Mobutu was regarded to as a tyrant was that the media had already demonized Joseph Mobutu as a tyrannical bully. And unfortunately, they pushed this narrative about Joseph Mobutu for decades. Moreover, the media had for years painted a bad picture of Mobutu, thereby tarnishing his image with the stroke of their pens and forever leaving a permanent stain on Mobutu's legacy. Yet the question still remains, was Mobutu inherently evil? What of those he helped in his lifetime? What of those who benefited from his regime? Why did they not speak up for him? Why did they not come forth and debunk the accusations that were laid against him? Mobutu faced massive opposition to his rule by the Congolese exiles, by the ethnic groups, by farmers, by students, almost everybody. And over the years, Mobutu proved adept in maintaining his rule in the face of civil wars and attempted coups. Yet his regime had little success in establishing the conditions needed for economic growth and development in Congo. Moreover, endemic governmental corruption, mismanagement, and neglect led to the decline of the country's infrastructure. While Mobutu himself reportedly amassed one of the largest personal fortunes in the world. Now let's talk a little about his family and his private life. Joseph Mobutu married his first wife, Marie Antoinette Yetene, who was popularly known as Mama Mobutu, the first lady of Zaire. And they both had 9 children, but unfortunately, she died in 1977. Later on, Joseph Mobutu married Bobila Dawa Mobutu in 1980, who was popularly known as Mama Bobila Dawa, and together they had 4 children. Mama Bobila Dawa is still alive and still remains in exile, dividing her time between Rabat in Morocco, her husband's burial place, and Brussels, where she owns properties. And then there was Mobutu's mistress. She was known as Kosiangama, who was the twin sister of his second wife, Bobila Dawa. And both she and Mobutu had 3 children. So Joseph Mobutu had a romantic liaison with twin sisters. But who are we to judge? Therefore, Mobutu had a record of 16 children, 9 by his first wife, 4 by his second wife, and 3 by his mistress. Some of his famous children include Nzanga Mobutu, who is still a politician in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then there is Kongolu Mobutu, who was a captain in the Special Presidential Division and a businessman before his death in 1998. Then there is Giala Mobutu, who is also an active politician in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then there is Nyiwa Mobutu, the eldest son of Mobutu, who was to succeed him but died of HIV/AIDS in 1994. Joseph Desire Mobutu, popularly known as Mobutu Sese Seko, the notorious dictator. Mobutu became president after seizing power in a 1965 coup and ruled Congo for 32 years, after which he was overthrown in a rebellion and exiled to Morocco, where he died of prostate cancer 3 months after he was exiled. This is what happened to Joseph Mobutu. He thought to be king forever, to rule over a people who despised him, to play God over his own people, forgetting his humble days and where he came from, forgetting to rub oil on the hands of his fathers, burning bridges as he ran toward power, shaking hands with his enemies and selling his soul to the devil, becoming drunk with power while evil slowly consumed him. And in the end, Mobutu had nothing to show for, nothing but regret and a bruised ego, nothing but a broken spirit and a dark legacy. Joseph Mobutu made choices that affected his legacy, and despite of his influences, he chose the wrong path. Instead of peace, he chose bloodshed. Instead of love, he chose war. Instead of unity, he chose destruction. Was he an evil man? Was he possessed by the devil? We may judge it to be so, but only God knows. As we remember this man, Joseph Mobutu, let us learn something from his life, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.